first thought that we were like about actual medicine as opposed to like the broader definition of medicine. So yeah, that's what they thought too. Anyway, so at that point, I was talking with somebody else on Twitter from Seeding Sovereignty, and I was looking for panelists, and it was SH, and they suggested Mayam. They said, well, you know, like I'm not in a position to be able to be on a panel, but have I got a great person for you? And suggested Mayam. And so, yeah, so it was you, Sarah, who's Kurak. We've had Sarah on the podcast.
Yeah, I was going to say, I remember Sarah.
Jonathan Ferrier was supposed to be on, but couldn't be on. He wound up having a conflict with time change. And then Ben. Yeah, so that was a really neat discussion. That was really good. And I just enjoyed Mayam so much. I was like, okay, we're going to do this again, and we're going to do this, and we could either have you on the pod or on the book club, or we could do both. And Mayam's like, let's do both.
All right.
Yeah, so Mayam was just on Ambe, the food sovereignty panel. Also, again, with Ben. So at some point when the border opens, either Ben's going to have to go down to New Mexico or Mayam's going to have to come up to Peterborough, because there was a lot of common ground between the two of them.
That I love so much.
Yeah, and now here we are. Now Mayam doesn't have to share space with anybody but us.
Right? All eyes are on you.
Oh. No, I enjoy
the cutest pink hat in case like nobody's watching the stream right now because we're like 2 hours ago. But for people that are listening to the podcast, Mayam's got a pink hat on.
Oh, actually, it's a really cool hat. It kind of adds a little flavor, you know, to the space. It's colorful, and I love because I've got a background on in my space that kind of matches in with some of the colors. So I love that we could be all in sync. And
so just for clarity, Carrie, when you're saying a background in my space, you mean the room that you're in, right? Like you're not still on myspace.com.
Yeah, I was gonna say, no, we're not taking it old school. Not at least not that way back old school. But yes.
Showing my age. I remember bulletin boards. Do you remember bulletin boards? Like not the push pin kind, but like the ones that you did online that were like mailing lists that you got. Yeah, that's how old we
are. Those.
I kind of remember those.
I was gonna say
bulletin board servers. Yes, the old NativeNet BBS. Good times.
It's you know what's so amazing about this train of the conversation is we can see how evolutionary things have been, like how far the internet spaces have come. And it reminds me, though, of how those plant the seeds. See how I'm going to do this? Those plant the seeds, you know, those old ways of you know, gathering information and, you know, being in the space of each other, planted the seeds for how we could now be sitting on this podcasting forum today, doing this work in the way that we're doing it. And it seeded the beginnings for us to have these kinds of conversations. That one's a win. I feel that.
That was a really, really good segue. So Mayam, why don't you tell us, because I don't think I've given you an opportunity in the past to even just talk about Seeding Sovereignty.
Yeah.
And what that organization is. So why don't you kind of give us an introduction? Because Carrie doesn't know you, and the Medicine for the Resistance listeners, a lot of them, you know, kind of won't have had the benefit of hearing you in the other formats. But also talk a little bit about Seeding Sovereignty and what that collective is about, because that collective does some really cool work that you're a part of. So why don't you kind of tell us a bit about yourself and about how you got involved with Seeding Sovereignty?
Right. And thank you so much, both of y'all, for having me on this podcast. Like Patty was saying, it's been a pleasure every time we've met. And no matter the space, if it's a long group gathering or if it's just an intimate space like this, it's been such a pleasure and a joy just to continue to just really grow with one another. So yeah, I'm a member of Seeding Sovereignty, and I recently joined Seeding Sovereignty January of this year, so January 2021. And it's really interesting. I remember I had a friend connect me to Seeding Sovereignty and was just like, we really think that you would have a great place in this organization. We're shifting a lot of our efforts from just direct action oriented to going back to cultivating like relationships with the land and then also relationship with the people. And I was just like, okay, that's something that I'm also moving towards too. Just in my past as being an organizer and having a different role now of being a land steward and a farmer and still organizing, but not necessarily being so direct action oriented. So yeah, when I was contacted and then introduced into Seeding Sovereignty, I just thought, wow, like what a pleasure and honor to be a part of this space. So I'm gonna read the About Us page on the Seeding Sovereignty website, and it's on seedingsovereignty.org, where people and listeners can check it out all about us more. And it reads that our work centers around not only land liberation, but is founded on the tenets of mutual aid, community defense, emancipation through education, and solidarity with underestimated, brilliant, and often marginalized populations. We are committed to mental health and wellness, dismantling systems of oppression, and reclaiming our lands, languages, ways of knowing, and stewardship of our waterways and natural resources. By investing in Indigenous folks and communities of the global majority, we cross the threshold of liberation together, which is amazing and a lot. And there's so much in there, right? To just really digest and sit with. Yeah, so there's a lot of different work. We're scattered throughout Turtle Island, but there's a lot of different work that calls us and draws us together. So there's talking circles taking place where folks who identify as Indigenous can just share space with one another in community, especially during the context of the pandemic, where sharing space is something that is few and far in between nowadays. So just talking about that, I have a friend, Essay, who Patty had mentioned, who holds that space for a lot of folks who may not have that opportunity to just share who they are. Essay also is founder of Medicine Wheels, which I think is really beautiful because Medicine Wheels is all about connecting youth and giving them space to skateboard or roller skate. And the medicine of that activity of just being in community with one another and also through movement with one another too, which I thought was really beautiful.
That is neat.
Yeah, I was just like, whoa, my mind's blown.
Yeah, I love it.
Yeah, we also have in the works a community defense network, which is all about providing information for folks to have resources around Cop Watch or mutual aid or just whatever it looks like in certain communities to really just show up for one another in times of crisis, but also just in times of just seeing the human need that we just need to be in relationship with one another. And then what I do is, and this is a new program, but I'm a land steward of Ancestral Acres Farm and Garden. That name came to me because my grandmother was the one who introduced me into the practice of caring for plants and caring for the land. And her ancestors taught her that, right? And her ancestors' ancestors taught them. So for me, it was only fitting to title the land steward project Ancestral Acres Farm and Garden. And the general purpose and mission statement of what I do along with other people, because there's no way I can do this by myself, it's unsustainable, is to connect with indigenous communities. So I'm on Isleta Pueblo territory, also known as Albuquerque, New Mexico. So it's to connect with the folks whose land they still occupy, be in relationship with these folks, and then also have this very beautiful, beautiful process of growing plants for seed. And through that connection, the seeds are distributed back to our indigenous communities, as well as growers who identify as QT BIPOC, so queer, trans, Black, indigenous people of color, and just seeing the importance and the power and the magic that we bring to spaces, spaces that always do not value us, you know. So having a space where we can just come and be ourselves and have a place of refuge on the land and be in relationship with our indigenous kin on the land. And for me, it all starts with the seed, right? And how with our connections to our seeds, we're connected to the land, we're connected to our food, our water, and so many other beings, right? So that's a little bit about seeding sovereignty and what I do.
I am, thank you for the expansiveness of that explanation. And I am like, really just taking you in, like there's this effervescence about your personality, like the way you are, but yet underneath it, I sense like this really gentle, kind of grounded soul. Like it makes sense to me that you are a curator of seeds and of the land. I love the steward of the land. It's totally your energy that I pick up. And you mentioned something that I feel really strongly, and I'd love to hear a little bit more about when you were talking about, you know, I'm always about ancestors and bringing that realm in. And you mentioned your grandmother and your grandmother teaching you about how to cultivate plants. Tell us a little bit about that. How did that happen and what was happening in that space?
Yes, Carrie, thank you so much for asking that question, because, you know, without her, I wouldn't even be in this process, like not only, you know, just biologically, but also just all the things that she imparted onto me. So I used to spend the summers with my grandmother when I was a little kid. Every summer, I lived in Charlotte, North Carolina at the time, also known as Catawba territory. So I lived in Charlotte, which is kind of like a city, you know, it's like the next Atlanta. So it's a happening town. And every summer I would leave the city and then go to rural North Carolina, or Monroe, as we like to say, Monroe, North Carolina. And I would spend the summers with my grandmother there. And my grandmother was the woman who would be like, you're not going to be on your Game Boy all day. We got things to do. So she had me out there in the field with her. And she had like a little small backyard garden that, to me, I always remembered was lush and green. Okra taller than myself, chickens running about. She grew sweet potatoes and car tires. And she was just very resourceful with her energy as well as the space that she was occupying. And for me, one of the main things that she taught me was this isn't just like a take relationship. This is something that we learn from and that we're ultimately in service to when it comes to tending to the land, that we're in service with the land and we're in relationship during that process. So that was something that she had always taught me, you know. So she would have plants climbing one another, working with one another. It was never anything that was just one single crop. And I feel like a lot of folks would probably call her garden messy, but I think there was so much organized structure, not just with the plants that were growing, but with the soil network that she was building underneath the ground too. And she knew that, even if she didn't have the scientific language for it. So she was the one who really taught me, you know, just the value of what it means to really be in relationship with the land. And not just the fruits that are produced, but just the little lessons that you learn when it comes to patience, when it comes to you plant in abundance, not because you're going to expect to receive abundance, but because the land's going to require something too, right? So there are going to be crops that die and go back to the land. There are going to be birds that eat things. There are going to be the insects that eat it. And that we're all in relationship with that too. So she taught me that it was something outside of ourselves as humans, that we're in this connection with so many other beings that we see, as well as beings that we don't see beneath the surface.
You sound just like Ben. But I kind of laugh because I hear you talking about your grandmother. Did your mom have the same kind of gardening skills, or did that skip from your grandma to you?
So it's interesting that you say that, because I call myself a fifth generation. I would be six, but it skipped the family. It skipped my, so this is on my dad's side. My mom's parents also farmed, but they had a sad incident where they actually died when my mom was like 10. So so it skipped both sides. So my dad, which is the North Carolina side, they grew up in a rural area. And as soon as he was ready to get out into the city, he got out into the city. And I don't blame him. Growing up in North Carolina in the 60s, especially rural North Carolina. So I don't blame him for leaving, but for me, and on my mom's side too, they grew up in Missouri in the 60s, also similar. And she ended up moving up to Michigan, and then from Michigan to North Carolina, where they met later. So I don't, it's a lot for someone to stay in that area and continue to farm. So it did skip that generation, but it came back around, and I feel like that's the beauty and the blessing, And when we talk about it, they're just like, I'm glad that it did, and they never expected me to farm, but we're all happy that it came to be that way.
Well, I was thinking that because you sound kind of like my mom and kind of like Ben, not at all like me, because because my mom is still a gardener, right? I mean, I grew up weeding. She was, and she also, you took care of the ground and you planted things together. And I mean, her garden tended to be those, those neat rows. That's her German background, right? Like neat rows. But there was also, companion planting and mulching and reading organic gardening magazines and all of that stuff. But it skipped me completely. I don't know if I had like after school weeding trauma or whatever that was. I don't know. But Ben has somehow become this, this really invested gardener, and talking about it in exactly the ways that you do. So it skipped me completely, but kind of went from my mom to him in a really neat way. And what I find kind of important to highlight in that is my mom is not my Indigenous parent, right? Like my mom is my German Ukrainian parent, but she got it, right? Like she understood the need to have relationship with land. And she, and so when we talk about it, so often it gets kind of caught up in this kind of mystical Indian thing that we have this kind of weird painting with the colors of the wind, relationship to land. And really, it's just a matter of getting to know who's around you, like the people in terms of, land being a person in its right and all of that. And, so when you're talking about, your family being from Missouri and from North Carolina and, many generations of that, how do you not have many generations of that and not have deep relationship with land? I think that's...
Well, I find it an interesting conversation overall. Got me thinking, because I, like you, Patty, I was giggling because I relate to you. my family, my parents are both West Indian, as I've said before, we know that. And both of my grandparents had like land and grew on it. I remember some of my earliest memories of my grandparents on my father's side would be going to Barbados, and they had this huge avocado tree that was in the front garden, and then in the back there was this huge coconut tree that went up into the back. And one of the rituals my grandfather would do every time we would arrive, because he knew I used to like to see it, he would scale the coconut tree for me. And as a greeting, he would like climb it up and then cut the coconuts down and bring them down, and then, you know, do the traditional opening of the coconut so I could drink it right when we first would arrive. And I remember being in awe, first of all, like that he could scale this tree so readily and with such ease. And at the time, he would have been in his 70s. Like he was a man of a seasoned age, but he would be up that thing like nobody's business. I was always amazed at that. And just the naturalness of how he would sit in that space, how he could just do that. It was a part of who he was. And the other thing that came in is I also found the food felt strange to me, because I was coming from this very Canadian space, and everything was so organic and natural. And the one thing that I could eat and love to eat was the avocados off of that tree. And they call it pear. It's a very different name, but or it was a different name, but he would always make sure that, you know, he would also do that with me. He'd let me like he'd hold me as let me reach up, right, to pick the avocados out of the tree. And then I would get to take that avocado and bring it back into the house and cut it and eat it for my dinner. Now, mind you, I ate so much avocado, I normally ended up with, you know, something that my stomach didn't feel good, but that's beside the point. Grandparents' role is to let you eat whatever you want. And they did that a lot. And so for me, when we talk about these relationships we have, it with the land, it stems back to seeding our sense of who we are, building these relationships. And my parents were really great. Like your mother though, Patty, kind of very organized gardens and spaces. But when it came to me, I enjoyed when Grandpa held me up to pick out the avocado, but don't ask me to grow the avocado. And yeah, don't ask. It just, that translation didn't happen. But ironically, and this will be the final end of this space, I have a daughter who we grew up very urban for the most part, you know, we're in the suburban spaces. And she ended up taking a path that led her into some interesting spaces. I'm going to just put it that way. She ended up with a brain injury, and it, you know, has been some challenges in her life as she's moved forward. But as we've rounded this curve, what I found this year, she planted this incredible garden. And she grew roses and strawberries and all of these amazing, I think she grew like, what else did she grow? Peppers. And she did it right in her front lawn. She had like a little tiny piece of a front garden. And she had never done it before, except for the time she spent with her grandmother at her house in her suburban garden. And she's now doing that with my granddaughter. So this idea of not only do we learn, there's something that I believe that does flow through. So from, you know, generation to generation, it didn't stick with me, but it's embedded in the spaces that we move through. And I relate to you, Patty, in that way. It's an amazing thing to watch that skip, because to me, that's also about the tenacity of who we are as people of color and Indigenous folk. There's a tenacity, there's a knowing that comes not only from the land, but from our response to wanting to be with the land, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Talk a little bit about the seeds. The thing about the, with the saving seeds, that's just really interesting to me, the whole process, because I know that there are people, like there's whole networks of people that that's what they do. They save seeds. So can you talk a little, because that's kind of what, this generational thing, right? Because we don't all just, go to Canadian Tire or go to, Stokely's or whatever it is to buy the seeds. Like there's some real value in cultivating plants to save the seeds.
Mhm. Yeah, so echoing off of what Carrie was saying, it's something also that my grandmother did that felt almost like intuitive, and I feel like that's what we're talking about, that intuition, even if it is not necessarily being practiced by us or like being practiced by our grandparents or whoever, like the intuition still lies embedded within us. And that's what she taught me, was that intuition to save seed. And it's really interesting because like, I never really considered myself to be a seed sharer or a seed saver until last year. And I think it's really interesting under the context of the pandemic of how that unfolded. I would save seeds here and there. Like if it was a plant I liked, if it was the biggest sunflower that I grew, I was like, okay, yeah, I'll collect those, But for me, it really got serious when the pandemic unfolded. And there's two parts to it. One thing I noticed was there's like a lot of people starting their gardens, which I think is really beautiful, for folks to see that as an opportunity to connect with the spaces that they are on. And then major seed corporations were like, well, shoot, everyone's starting a garden, let's hike up those prices. And then I was just like, wait, what? It's gonna be inaccessible for myself as a grower, and even other people who want to get into the practice. It's gonna become inaccessible for us. And then I remember having a conversation with a dear friend, Mick, who is from Laguna Pueblo. And he was talking to me last year about how water holds memory and how seeds hold memory. And as he's talking to me about this, he has these Zuni gold beans in his hand. And he was talking to me about, how these beans have been cultivated since time immemorial, for ages and ages. And they've not only adapted to the desert Southwest, but they're also changing as the climate is changing too. And that really stuck with me, because I was just like, not only are we talking about, as a farmer, I was thinking about saving money, but also I'm thinking about, as we're shifting more and more into this kind of chaotic climatic situation, our plants are also adapting with us too. And as a land steward, I feel like I have this responsibility now to not only grow food for immediate consumption, right? But to grow a seed, tend to the seed for, maybe our future generations who are also going to continue that practice too. Because if we don't have seeds, we're not going to have much, So for me, my friend Mick really gave me that wake up call last year. And then as far as sharing it with Indigenous communities, it only felt right. To me, it felt like it just made sense. As I'm in this space and as I'm interacting from folks from Isleta, there's so much generosity between the exchange that for me, I feel like I am just doing my part as a grower to just, continue that reciprocity. So it kind of just made sense for me. And now the winter's approaching, I'm weighing out the seeds, I'm contacting people, and I'm excited to just share, because the one thing that I'm really learning from these plants, especially our beans and our corn, is that they're such great givers. Like they're such great providers. Like there's so much that they offer that I'm like, I can't hoard this. There's no way, I have to continue to share because they're teaching me the lesson to share. So it just feels like I have to continue that. It feels almost like a calling, even though I don't want to phrase it as that, but it definitely does. to just continue that practice of not only has been taught, by my blood family and by my friends, but also by the plants too, and how they lead by example.
And there's something really cool about saving seeds, because the same plant that grows in one place and grows in another place and grows in another place, like you had talked about another time, they're pulling up the lessons of that place, right? Like, Carrie and I live in wine country. And there's and there's a lot of, there's lots of wineries around here. And there's two main soil types. There's the red clay, and then there's the black earth. And there's this one farm. There's this one farm that one vineyard that has both types of soil on its vineyard, and so I think I don't even remember now. But they grow like the same variety of grapes in the two different soils, and then they have you sample them and see if you can tell the difference. And it's the same variety, like say like it's Merlot. I don't know, I'm just making that up. But it's the Merlot, let's just say it's the Merlot type grape. And they'll put the glass each in front, and they'll ask you if you can tell the difference between the two Merlot wines grown in the same year, same climate, but just one's in the red soil and one's in the black soil. And can you tell the difference? And they're very different. Like it's not like trying to tell the difference between Coke and Pepsi. These are very different. And even, and so there's that, because what they're pulling up out of the earth is creating a different, even though it's the same variety of grape, it's creating different flavor. But also, we also have two separate almost climates. So we've got the lower bench, and then we've got, it's called the upper bench. It's up on top of the escarpment. And up on top of the escarpment is more the soft fruit trees up there. And on the lower bench, it's minerals. It's very rock heavy, because as the glaciers move back, they left lots of rocks behind. And that's like when they gouged out the from the escarpment. Even then, the same variety of grapes, very like ones on the upper bench taste much different than the ones on the, like it's really cool to me how that happens. And then the seeds would carry the knowledge of that, would carry the memory. And so when you're exchanging seeds, you're also exchanging that knowledge that the seeds are containing. And that kind of diversity is really important. It's not like somebody was laughing on Twitter about that new University of Austin that just got started. I don't know if you guys heard about it.
No, I haven't heard about that.
No, it's a bunch of people. So I think it was last year, there was this letter about cancel culture that went out. And of course, whenever white people are going on about cancel culture, it's because they're mad that somebody's called them a racist or something. So they've decided to take all their toys and start their own university. And somebody, Daniel Jose Older, had made a joke that they're very proud of the diversity on their committee, because they have 3 women named Rebecca who spell it differently. So they're very proud of their diversity.
Actually kind of funny. That's quite funny.
But yeah, this process of saving seeds and exchanging them from different places, it strengthens the plant in ways that we're not really conditioned to think of when we just go down to whatever our local store is and pick up, the big brand name of seeds. And there's a lot more of these seed saving organizations or groups that are, my friend Celeste is doing that as well. She's part of a seed saving collective. And I know the Haudenosaunee, the people up at Six Nations, there's a seed saving collective up here as well.
I'd love to talk. I'm sorry, Patty.
I was gonna say she's very sad, because when I say I want corn, what I want is like the yellow peaches and cream corn. And what she's trying to give me is like the Haudenosaunee blue corn that needs to be nixtamalized. And I'm like, yeah, I do not like
that is, we all have our preferences, Patty, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I want the GMO, really sweet yellow corn. That's what I want.
Not as organic as it could be.
Can't be good Indians all the time. It's exhausting.
I want to hear a little bit more though about the seed saving. very often we hear about the seed bank that's supposedly in a secret location somewhere underground, you know, out in some very cold place that I can't remember at the moment. But apparently, you know, the fractions that be are saving heirloom seeds for whatever their purposes are. And, you know, that's one of those great, conspiratorial mysteries, or actually, I think it is real. But I'm sensing, you said something, ma'am, and also you, Patty, you kind of hinted at it, is that is it a growing sense of the urgency because of the way Mother Earth is starting to respond to the environmental changes, or this desire to keep the diversity going. I thought it was really cool because I actually went on a wine tour this summer, and we did exactly what you were saying, Patty. I'm not gonna name the winery, but we had to do the taste testing, and there was some very drastic and distinct differences. And I remember thinking at the time how incredible the earth is. If we don't recognize that it must be a sensory organism. It has to be, because it can produce such a drastic difference. I was a little happy too off of the 2-3 glasses of wine that I had in the tasting. Had quite a little bit there, but it was incredible to me to tap into that sense. And is there a growing urgency? Is that sense of we must start doing this on our level, on like just a personal level, on a resistance level in a way? Like, is this urgent? Does that feel real? Does that even make sense what I'm trying to say? I hope I'm articulating it.
Yes, it does make a lot of sense. And I think it's a little bit of both of, you know, the fascination with the diversity, because also just in Albuquerque alone, there's different microclimates, there's different soils, because the Rio Grande runs right through the city. So you have where the river used to run, and then you have where the banks are now. So you have clay and sand. And it's also just really amazing about how the seeds respond to water, especially with the different soil types. So I think, you know, one of the main things for me, I'm really fascinated with genetic diversity too. I'm not a scientist, but just like observing how the plants respond to conditions, and the knowledge that carries, like, really fascinates me. And then of course, just wanting to share that with others too. I feel like for me, the next step is trying to share that with high school students, because, you know, that is that next generation. So yeah, just that diversity and like what that brings, and how that is really fascinating with what you eat, how the plants respond, and then also how the seeds respond too. I think that's something that just carries a lot of marvel and wonder. And of course, the different pockets of regions that the seeds end up, like, of course, like Patty was saying, that strengthens that genetic diversity. And I think in response to the shifts of the weather, and our climate, I think they both complement one another too. It's not like, you know, trying to build the ultimate seed to combat climate change. No. It's like, you know, the plants are going to adapt regardless, and we're just facilitating that process and then exposing folks to that as well, to build, you know, that sense of resiliency, and that relationship that, in some ways, at least from, you know, a lot of people that I talk to who identify as Black, like, sometimes we feel like disconnected from that relationship that has been within us, you know. So what better way to do it with seed saving and the intimacy of that process of really being in relationship with that plant.
Just breathing into that.
made me think of so in Tyson Yunkaporta's book Sand Talk, he talks about the Aboriginal elders who say, you know, if you don't move with the land will move you. You know, because he's talking about the temporary nature of civilizations and societies, and really whatever we have now, however we're organized now, even as Anishinaabe people, however we think of ourselves now, this is not how we existed 2,000 years ago. You know, whether my ancestors thought of themselves as Anishinaabe or not 2,000 years ago, I have no idea. What we're going to think of ourselves, you know, like societies change, everything's changed, cities don't last forever. The land will, if you don't move with the land will move you. And so what you're talking about is that relationship. The plants are going to evolve, they're going to adapt. Some may need protection and help adapting. And this isn't, you know, Ben and I talk about this sometimes, because this isn't a matter of like throwing in the towel on climate change and just saying, well, I guess it's happening, so there's nothing we can do. There are things we can do. There are things we should be doing. You know, we should be pressuring, you know, corporations and governments to make better policy, and to, you know, and to just stop taking things out of the ground. Like there was a meme going around that shows, you know, what the world looks like with gas-powered automobiles, and it's like these clogged freeways. And then it's like, this is what the world will look like with electric vehicles, same clogged freeways. You know, that these green solutions, this Green New Deal, you know, whatever, it's still colonial. It's still fascist. It's still imperial. Like it's still all of these things. And so we need these organizations like Seeding Sovereignty, you know, like, you know, the, you know, pay your rent and becoming a nonprofit, you know, these things that promote and support the work of small groups working together in networks, forming collectives, saving the things, right? Saving the things that are adapting, protecting the things that are adapting. This is how we're going to survive. This is how, you know, so hearing you talk about it is just, is hopeful. It's profoundly hopeful, I think, being a farmer. Almost more so than any other endeavor, really. Like saving seeds, like I can't think of anything, I can't think of anything, any endeavor more hopeful, you know, more deeply invested in hope. And you're having a baby.
Yes.
Also hopeful. I want to talk about the baby.
The other seed, the big seed.
Yes.
Yeah.
I love that so much. And I definitely want to hear about the baby. Like I'm all about those spaces. Like just love that. I just want to touch upon really quickly something you just said, Patty, because it struck me, the sense of this being a hopeful conversation, you know, and I really feel that. Like I'm, you know, we hear so much in the news right now about, you know, this sense of the inevitable, that the world is, you know, down a path and a trajectory where it cannot be changed. But you mentioned, and could you repeat the book that you quoted, Patty? Because I would love to really get that one. It's not one I have on my list yet. And this, oh, look at that. She's got it right there. So anybody, if you're listening to the podcast, Patty's holding up a book. It's by Tyson Yunkaporta is his name?
Tyson Yunkaporta.
Yunkaporta, called Sand Talk. Is that what it was?
Yes. Yeah, it's called Sand Talk. But I will also promote The Disordered Cosmos by Chanda Prescott Weinstein. Also because Chanda is a physicist.
Yes.
She's an astrophysicist, and she also talks about the importance of listening to Indigenous knowledge, listening to and centering Indigenous knowledge, and kind of, you know, looking up into the sky and deep within. And I love this book so much, and I, you know, I love Chanda so much.
I do too. I have my copy sitting over here, and I agree, because I think we need it's this actioning. I wanted to bring it up. Thank you for bringing so much of that into scope for us, Patty, because I wanted to mention it, because I think with your actioning, you're actually, Mayam, doing something that is within our reach. You know, we may not all be able to be farmers to the scale and with the, you know, the in-ground knowledge that I think, you know, probably runs in your blood, but we can all, you know, accept some seeds. We can all learn about how to seed. We can try and grow. Like I grew an okra for the first time this summer, and I got 2 out of my tree. I was so proud of myself. I got 2. For somebody who plants look at me and go, "You are the plant witherer." Like they never survived. These 2 did, and there was something very primal that brought up in me. It felt so much like our truth. And so I wanted to bring some light to that idea, that sense of knowing that even though the things may seem at a precipice or a cusp, a space of no return, we can still come home. We can still ground in. We can do these simple beginning steps that allow us to show up in honor and in space of our ancestors and our ancestral world. So I thought that was really important. So, okay, now you can tell us about the baby. You want to hear all about the baby.
Yeah, so my partner Nova and I are we're gonna be having a baby at the end of the month. Supposedly, baby might come whenever they come, but the due date is November 30th. So that's our little seed. And baby has been planted with so much intention. Baby's name is Indra Siomar, or Indra Siomar, which for us like holds a lot of deep meaning. Indra can be seen as like a deity in Buddhism or in Hinduism. We are kind of like lay Buddhists. We're not like monks or anything like that. But this deity, Indra, is one who brings rain, one who gives clouds, which living in, and it's so funny that we're talking about this now, because I feel like this is the first time in like, I don't know, 2 or 3 weeks where it's actually cloudy. So that's great. But yes, so baby, you know, is the one who brings rain into our lives. And for us to live in the desert Southwest where rain is few and far in between, that gives us a lot of hope when we're talking about hope. And also bringing a baby into a world like this where we don't know what the next day will bring, but we have hope that we're gonna raise this child in a good way. So that's a little bit about baby. And Siomar, also mar in Spanish means ocean. So again, with the connection to water, and just how healing and fluid water is. And so yeah, that's baby. Baby's also very giddy, loves to kick, loves to move, loves children's stories already. So yeah, it's been a sweet process of this period as we're shifting into the winter here, and us really being a part of that process, and then also holding and caretaking baby during the winter months. I feel like, you know, the winter calls us to turn inwards, and what better way to do it with a new baby.
Right.
So we're both really excited.
I'm so
yeah, that's amazing.
Yeah, I'm celebrating you, celebrating that space. And off air, I would be honored. It's interesting because I have just gotten back into doing something that I love to do, which was knit. I'm a knitter. I do tons of knitting, and I've been knitting baby stuff, interestingly enough. So because it was like an ancestral thing, a calling to get prepared for the babies coming in, because I believe that the children that are entering the world now are coming in to do some big work, the energies of them. So if you wouldn't mind, I have some little things I would love to be able to knit some stuff and send, but we can talk about that off air. But it seems to be a thing coming in. So yes, if you would honor me, I'd be so pleased to be able to do that.
We're about it. Yeah, we're so about it.
That's
I'm
pretty
pretty sure
sweet.
Inter's about
Yeah.
it.
It's
That's
been
really
weird. I haven't touched my knitting stuff in 5 years, and then all of a sudden I've been like, I've pulled some stuff out. I just knit a whole little baby sweater and caps and booties and
Oh,
stuff.
wow.
And I was like, well, why am I doing this? But
Well,
the
I guess it's the time. I don't know why I do half the things that I do. And mostly I don't even, well, mostly I jump into stuff and I'm like, yeah, sure. How hard can that be? And all of a sudden I'm like, I'll find out. Hopefully,
It's just
we'll find
weird.
out.
I
You
missed it
said-
though.
You had said something about, you had talked also about water. This is just, I'm just thinking because you had talked about, the baby's name is connected to water. And and being in Albuquerque, you were talking about, we were talking another time about water use and water conservation and kind of how important that is in the desert. I'm mindful of the time, but can you talk a little bit about that, kind of about how you work with water and kind of have it for your farm and kind of how that works? Because yeah, I mean, you guys are in a desert, right?
Right.
So you're farming in a desert. Talk about that.
I
In
would
the
love to hear
Chihuahua
about
desert.
that.
Yeah. So I was at this conference last week, and this is kind of further deepened kind of already the thoughts I have around water, but there's this term water rights, which means, I have a right to use this water. And what if we thought about water relationships instead? And that just like blew my mind, because I was just like, yeah, like when we have this idea of dominion and ownership over water, like that is already going to put us in this horrible, horrible relationship. So the way I set up things at the farm is there's this way where folks irrigate here in the Southwest called flood irrigation. And that is an irrigation method that has been done for ages, like eons, where essentially there's water from the Rio Grande that's then diverted to flood irrigate farm fields. And flood irrigation usually happens in a typical year from March to November. This year, we're only allowed to flood from April to August. So that tells you the drought that we're in. And growing crops that have been adapted and used to the desert Southwest. So really having to be intentional about what I'm planting and being like, okay, there's some crops like, no shame on broccoli, but like broccoli, unless you're really working harder than you need to be, it's not going to do well here. So what kind of things can I grow instead that are leafy greens that can still take care of themselves? So really just like setting that intention in the crop planting method. And then of course, planting crops that have been grown in the desert Southwest. And then I've recently found out that my ancestral lineage is from Cameroon. So planting crops that are native to West Africa that have similar climates here and there, and then, just having a lot of plants and having that trust that, they'll take care of themselves or they'll just return back to the land. So having that method of like non-attachment, but still balancing, the love and the care and the affection that goes into the caretaking process. So in short, it's like really being intentional with the flood, and then planting things that are going to have a chance here. And, a lot of things that work out east may not work here unless, you're really, really trying. So, yeah.
And that is relationship, right? That's understanding the place that you're at, because so much of agriculture is really about what they did in a very small part of the northeast corner of the European peninsula of Asia. And then they generalized that to the whole planet. they brought that everywhere and figured, well, if it works in this small little unique geography, then we're just going to do that everywhere. And I mean, we see it most obviously in lawns, but that entire process of the way we do agriculture here, oh, and that's my dog. It's very, it doesn't pay attention to the place that you're at and the relationships of the things where you're at. And that's so important to do, to think about, well, who else do these plants get? That's what Ben does. Like, he nerds out as soon as he sees a bug. He nerds out about what relationships does this bug have with other plants and with other bugs? And do I like this bug? How do I encourage this bug? And it's just because when he plants a garden, he thinks about everybody who's going to be living in this garden, right? Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And the birds got all of my raspberries this year. I think I got 3, but that's okay. I like it.
Yeah.
Well, that is a thing. Like, I have been trying to be okay with the sense of what you're talking about, creating like a really fully encompassing ecosystem of my garden. And what that really means is that I let mine go wild. I'm just not a cultivator. And I don't know if that is something that is innate, because I've always felt put out by immaculately kept lawns and, you know, perfectly grown flowers that are just in the exact formation. It has never felt somewhere deep inside of me to be right. And once I also learned that most of those are cultivated from fertilizers or from the pesticides that we've also, you know, used to keep out certain, you know, elements or unwanted elements. That really affected me. And also, I think it was one of the things that killed a cat of mine, my very first cat when I was a child. I'm sure it was the pesticides put on the glass, got brain cancer. Anyway, another story, trauma. I have recognized, because my lawn and my garden does not look as cultivated as everybody else's. And I know that my neighbors may not be as impressed, but for me, it has been about honoring what we consider the dandelions or, you know, the weeds in a garden, honoring those spaces, because to me, I see beauty. One year, just for an experiment, I let a thistle grow. And I was amazed. Yeah, this thistle grew 6 feet. And it was like, well, it felt like 6 feet. It grew high and then it flowered. And what I noticed about when it flowered, all of the bees came into my garden. And I would talk to this, I wouldn't touch him because he was, but I was amazed at how the flies and the honeybees would come to this plant when it was flowering. And I thought to myself, what makes that plant less valuable? Mm-hmm. What makes that plant not deserve to been able to get to the majesty of what it did?
The balls that get stuck on my dog's fur.
Yeah.
That's what it is.
My cat didn't enjoy it either too. A lot of that I was picking out his fur. But it was nonetheless, for me, I thought, it grew when I just left it alone instead of trying to dig it out, which, you know, when you're dealing with those, they're like impossible. I just let it be. And it was a beautiful thing for me to witness. And I wonder, like, when we talk about how we stand in relation to what we are told should be in a garden, if it's not time to push back against that. So, you know, every year I traditionally have grown one in the last 3. And I find that has been my own kind of garden rebellion. I'm never going to be the person that's going to grow a cultivated space. Let's just put it that way.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I mean, if you look at, you know, the natural world, like if you go out into the woods, are like the trees in perfect neat like rows and are all like the understories and in perfect neat rows. No, everything has a natural design and also take cares of one another too. I also grew a thistle well, I didn't grow, the thistle just grew. And I was just like, all right, cool.
Right.
And I was like, all right, that's fine, you know.
This world and we just live in it.
Yeah. So I feel that. Yeah.
Yeah, right.
Amazing.
It was really an experience.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And I have this beautiful big tree in my backyard, and for the first time I had to prune her. I always feel it's a female energy I get from her. And I pruned her. And at first I was worried about this because I got hired a professional, because there's no way I would have done it. I hired somebody to come in and you know, cut back some of what I felt, or what he felt, because it wasn't me, wasn't working, right? What was making it, the tree felt heavy, and sort of some of the leaves weren't flourishing the same way. And I remember, after all of the trimming had been done, or the pruning was done, I almost felt like she came back. Like I noticed, you know, there was like a little bit of a bounce to her sway in the breeze. And her leaves extend out over our fence into and onto another tree. And I hadn't noticed that they used to touch. And so why I'm mentioning this is where it was a reminder of, for me, that we have a relationship with our plants, and that they almost sense us, as well as it was an awareness for me to know that it almost felt like she was hugging that tree on the other side. And so I made sure that got left alone as much as we could, because some of it was hanging over my shed. But we left it alone too, because I could feel like there was some sort of connection. And so how do we honor the spaces of what exists, of how plants are in order or order themselves? And yet how do we offer in wholeness for them as well? Because I think if I hadn't pruned her, she wouldn't have been as healthy as she seems to be now. Mm-hmm. Is that a relationship that exists? Or could I just have left her alone and saved myself a bunch of cash?
No. That is a relationship that exists through and through. I mean, at least that's what I believe, you know, that, you know, as wild as this sounds, like there's a language that the plants are speaking or blowing in the breeze, whatever kind of way. And for us, as we're also a part of this world, they're sending us messages, and it's our responsibility to adhere to those messages and to act accordingly. So I think, you know, there is a beauty in the unkept, the non-pruned spaces, but I think also we live in this world together, and we also communicate with one another. So I think, you know, there's a way to do it when it just comes to really just listening, if that makes sense. Even though they're not speaking, they're like verbally, there's still something being communicated, and just listening, and then going with that gut feeling, even though you're like, I don't know why this is coming up. I don't know why I should pick that fruit or that tomato or cut that limb off or whatever, but there's something being communicated there in our gut feeling that I feel like rings true. And if it's a mistake, right? If something does end up dying, there's a lesson in that too, about you know, what we can learn. So I feel like there's so much, you know, because a lot of times we also just want to keep the plants alive too, but there's also lessons, which I feel like we can go on for another podcast, in the fall and in the winter, when things are dormant or when things die. So
what you said about some plants just return to the earth.
yes. Mm-hmm.
And they need to, and that's okay. Mm-hmm. And maybe, like, I don't know, most of my garden, when I plant it, returns to the earth. It seems to do much better. So anyway, I think I really like that you put that, because yeah, some crops don't do well and then they return to the earth, and the things that they pulled out of the earth, they go back to the earth, and then they become other plants. And there's just something, I am not a gardener. I wrote an essay last year for Native Appropriations called I Am a Reluctant Gardener, because every spring I feel like I should. And like, talk about COVID, I started like 75 tomato plants. There are 2 people living in this house. What are we going to do with 75? I'm going to put 75 tomato plants. So I wound up giving away so many seedlings because I think they're all going to die, and so I have to plant them all. And then of course they all die because I can't take care of 75 plants.
Right.
I can barely take care of any. So Ben has planted things that are perennials, like Jerusalem artichokes, and we've got raspberries. I've got tobacco growing, and so that's that's better. But there's just something really magical about putting a seed in the ground, and then it turns into food, and you can eat it. And that just, to me, just defies all logic. There's just something so completely magical about that. And I'm mindful of the time, and we have to get going. But I love talking to you, Mayam. I love your hopefulness, and the work that you're doing is really cool and interesting. And you'll be back, I know.
Yeah,
I'll have you back for something else. And at some point, I got to go back to Albuquerque. I got to go to Albuquerque. I was at Albuquerque a few years ago, but I got to get back for that balloon festival. So.
Oh my gosh,
yeah. I got to come back for that. Yeah, that's on the list of places to go back to, because I got to see that balloon festival. And you got to come up here and spend some time with Ben and his garden. So. And he's also having a baby. So also at the end of the month. So November 20th. So we're on baby watch.
Whoa.
That is so cool. I love that.
Yeah,
we're initiating you into grandma space.
I'm gonna be Kukum.
Right.
Got my gray hairs already. Pretty stoked about a baby that I can give back when they cry. I'm pretty excited.
Best part of it. Best part.
Anyway, thank you so much for coming back and continuing this relationship. And yeah, we're going to talk again for sure, because I love the work that you're doing and the hopefulness of what you do.
Go ahead. I was just going to say, I'm really grateful again to be in space with you and presence, Patty and Carrie. It's so wonderful to share this space together. And yeah, just vibe and share our stories. They've really been heartfelt. And that thistle, I won't forget. So yeah, that's really sweet. So I'm glad that we could share space. And I hope that we can continue to do that. I'll let you know about the baby mitts and boots. Yeah. Please
send me that through, and it will come through, definitely. I got you on that one. And now I know about you, Patty. This is just so great. my knitting needles can keep
me dance like Mayam babies.
Love it.
All right, we'll see you guys. Good night.
All right.
Good night. Bye.